Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today I will analyze the case of Guy Edward Bartkus. First I'll look at the background of this case, move to the timeline of the crime, then offer my analysis. Guy Edward Bartkus was born in September 1999 and lived in 29 Palms, California. This small city is about an hour northeast of Palm Springs. This is the home of the Marine Corps Air-Ground Combat Center, but Guy was not a Marine. He worked as a computer technician. Prior to that, he was an aide on a school bus for special needs students. At one time, Guy lived in Waterbury, Connecticut. According to his father, Guy was great with computers from an early age and had an interest in model rockets, smoke bombs, and stink bombs. When he was 9 years old, Guy burned down the family home while playing with matches. His father had not seen Guy since 2013, which is when Guy went to live with his mother. Guy's father described him as impressionable and indicated that he was influenced by friends who landed him in trouble. He was a follower, not a leader. Guy had a good heart, but something changed in him. He had been brainwashed. Now moving to the timeline of the crime. On Saturday, May 17, 2025, Guy Edward Bartkus drove his silver 2010 Ford Fusion to the American Reproductive Center's IVF clinic on North Indian Canyon Drive in Palm Springs, California. The center was closed at this time. At 10:52 a.m., an explosive device in the Ford Fusion detonated. The explosion was massive. It was felt over a mile away. Guy died in the blast. His body parts were found in multiple places around the clinic. In addition, 4 people were injured, and the building sustained substantial damage. A camera and a tripod were found nearby, as if Guy had been trying to live stream the bombing. Now moving to my analysis. Guy Edward Bartkus maintained a very unusual set of beliefs, which were outlined on a website and in a 30-minute audio recording of a manifesto purportedly linked to him. Here is a summary of his beliefs based on both of these sources. Much of this is paraphrased. Guy recorded his manifesto to explain why he targeted an IVF clinic. He said it came down to his anger that he existed. Nobody acquired his consent to bring him into the world. He was interested in a war against pro-lifers. An IVF clinic is the epitome of the pro-life ideology. People who would use a clinic like this are having kids after they sat there and thought about it. Guy considered this to be particularly offensive because it was premeditated. As a side note, when Guy used the term pro-life, he wasn't talking about the abortion issue, rather just people who think that life is good. Anyone who desires to be alive is pro-life. Guy described himself using a variety of uncommon terms. For example, he was anti-life, anti-natalist, and pro-mortalist. He didn't necessarily believe in killing people, rather he thought it was better if people never existed in the first place. Guy was an abolitionist vegan. He believed that no animals should be used by humans in any way. He talked about believing in negative utilitarianism, which states that suffering should be minimized rather than attempting to maximize pleasure. In his audio manifesto, Guy tried to offer what he believed was a rational argument in favor of the idea that humans should not exist and that humans who do exist should die as soon as possible. He stated that he did not consent to be born. His rights were violated by being alive at all. Consent is extremely valued in society, yet everyone who is alive achieved this status through a non-consensual act. Therefore, creating life is immoral. Given that no one can consent to existing, no one should be brought into the world. Guy found this to be a rational argument and believed that anyone who didn't buy into this argument was unintelligent. A major theme of his manifesto is that everyone who disagreed with him in any way was unintelligent, and Guy recommended that these people should go blank themselves. Guy was extremely confident in his ability to think rationally. From his perspective, he was right about everything. Guy compared living to being addicted to drugs, saying that he was not interested in being a life addict who was addicted to the life drug. Pushing substances is morally wrong, which includes encouraging people to take the life drug. Guy believed that human beings were not the product of intelligent design. People's flawed brains forced them to chase stupid and nonsensical things in life, like pursuing their basic needs. There is no fundamental good in life, rather people simply use time fixing bad states. Guy believed that life is absurd and the people who are alive are essentially trapped in slavery. He recognized that not everyone was miserable, but believed a lot of people were. The suffering of people is a complete waste. Nothing redeeming comes from it. Guy understood that people may believe he wanted to cause death, mostly because of the bombing part, but emphasized that he was pro-non-existence. He was certainly willing to kill people, but that was not his primary goal. The bombing would be conducted simply to get attention, not attention specifically on him, but rather to his cause of pro-mortalism. A major factor that motivated Guy to conduct this drastic bombing attack was censorship on the internet. He repeatedly stated how this was very upsetting to him. He tried to promote his views about humans not existing, but his comments were not permitted on various social media platforms. Guy insisted that the bombing would be conducted because he cared. He was trying to educate people that the system survives by pushing a life of addiction. The real villains are parents, because they are the ones who impose suffering. Death is inevitable, so every time parents create life, they create death. Pro-mortalism is a belief system that argues that death should happen sooner rather than later. No one can prevent death. It is all just a matter of timing. Guy was hopeful that if his message was widely embraced, the end goal would be achieved. Namely, the truth would win and society would begin the process of sterilizing the planet of the disease of life. Life will only continue as long as people hold the delusional belief that it does not cause senseless torture. Guy rambled on for a while about his superior level of awareness. He knew things that other people did not know, but being more aware came with a heavy price. Namely, it made him more miserable. He said, "I feel bad because I am aware." Worried that people were going to label him as governed by his feelings, Guy went on a rant about how having strong feelings doesn't necessarily make a person irrational. He was superior to others in the sense that he thought a lot about his feelings. His feelings had been filtered through a logical process. Guy insisted that all his decisions were rational. On his website, Guy mentioned how a female friend of his had died. This loss had a great effect on him. It appears as though he was talking about a woman named Sophie Tinney, who lived in Fox Island, Washington. She was allegedly shot by her boyfriend. It appears as though she wanted her boyfriend to pull the trigger. Guy indicated that he had never related to someone so much and could not imagine that he ever would again. He also referred to borderline personality disorder, implying that both he and Sophie suffered from this disorder. Now moving to the next question, what do I think happened in this case? This is just a theory, my opinion. Guy Edward Bartkus was self-centered, lonely, socially awkward, depressed, pessimistic, nihilistic, vindictive, grandiose, cold, callous, antisocial, had a sense of entitlement, and was exceedingly creepy. He thought it was unfair because he was depressed, when many people were not. Guy could not accept this reality and became attracted to a philosophy which painted all life as evil and unnecessary. He was projecting his own suffering onto everyone else. His depression wasn't just his problem. The entire world had a problem. All humanity had the disease of life. When a person is both depressed and selfish, it is not unusual for them to want to harm people, kind of like misery loves company. In Guy's case, he wanted to annihilate all human existence. It's almost like Guy was a low-rent James Bond villain who couldn't quite figure out a motive for destroying the world. His anger came first, and his plan came second. The depth of his pain was so pronounced, he convinced himself that nothing should exist because he suffered. This is the ultimate sense of entitlement. Guy embraced flawed reasoning in order to justify his radical stance. He believed himself to be superior to others. He was aware of the truth when the rest of the world couldn't figure it out. His mission was to share this amazing wisdom. People would gaze upon his amazing conclusions and realize they were addicted to life. If he could just get people to listen, Guy could solve everyone's problem of suffering. This is how he rationalized the bombing. Guy wanted his legacy to be savior of the world, a person who made everyone else wake up and realize the futility of existence. In reality, his legacy will be that of a ridiculous, nihilistic, and help-rejecting complainer, an example of how dangerous it is when narcissism is combined with low mood. Now moving to my final thoughts. In my career as a counselor educator, I have interacted with a wide variety of clients, supervisees, and students. I've noticed that pretty much every counselor struggles with certain kinds of presentations. Very few counselors are good with all types of clients. Some counselors are uncomfortable dealing with substance use issues. Others find obsessive traits difficult to treat. On occasion, I've encountered counselors who get frustrated when working with psychotic clients, uncertain how to help them. One presentation type, which is both common and particularly frustrating for many counselors, is the help-rejecting complainer, especially when that client believes they are being rational. They have logically figured out why they can never get better, and no one will convince them otherwise. They have become aware of something that the rest of the world does not realize. In a sense, the client is both cursed and special at the same time. Cursed by having symptoms, special by having wisdom. These are the clients who always respond, yes, but, when presented with any type of potential solution. They cannot be convinced to make changes in their life. Again, they have figured everything out, and logically, there is no hope. Despite being hopeless, they continue to come to counseling. They enjoy the never-ending argument with the counselor. A counselor working with this type of client may try to construct a rational argument to present to them, a way to overcome the client's assertions. Invariably, no matter how well thought out the counselor's argument is, the client rejects it. Again, there is no convincing the client. The advice I often give to supervisees in this situation is to roll with the resistance and affirm the autonomy of the client. Clients have the right to reject advice. They have the right to question the effectiveness of counseling strategies. Not every client is ready for change at any given time, but just the fact that a client is participating in counseling is a good sign that they will be open to change someday. It may seem strange, but counselors need to avoid the temptation to try to fix problems. The client is the person who has the answers. With reflection, clarification of values, and an exploration of thought patterns and feelings, a counselor can help a client to find the solution, which was always there. When looking at the extreme arguments made by someone like Guy Edward Bartkus, a person who saw the eradication of humanity as a logical cure for suffering, it may be tempting to debate him on the battlefield of ideas. However, engaging in endless philosophical and existential debates is not the answer. No matter how intellectual Guy believed his arguments were, they were fueled not by reason, but by pain. The appropriate target is not his philosophy, it's his depression. No matter how passionately Guy insisted otherwise, he was governed by his feelings. He didn't want people to believe that, but there is no doubt that his feelings were running the show. If Guy had been happy, well-adjusted, in a fulfilling romantic relationship, satisfied with his career, he would never have entertained fantasies of global annihilation. His ideology was not born of clarity, rather despair. A counselor working with somebody like Guy should resist the urge to win the argument. It's impossible to win a power struggle with someone who has nothing to lose. A client cannot be freed from suffering by being proven wrong. A proficient counselor will sit with the pain rather than wrestle with the argument. This will create a space where the client may eventually start doubting their own rigidity. When working with a help-rejecting complainer, the goal of a counselor is not to outmaneuver the client in the client's game, but to refuse to play it. The most effective path forward is not confrontation. An exploration of the client's pain is a much better way to construct a bridge out of purgatory. Those are my thoughts on the case of Guy Edward Bartkus. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you soon. I think that the idea that counselors should not fix clients is really one of the most difficult concepts for counseling students and supervisees to understand. It seems so foreign to the way that society talks about and frames fixing things that have gone wrong. If someone has a motor vehicle that is malfunctioning, they expect a mechanic to diagnose the problem and directly fix it. It's like to replace a part, to replace a starter or an alternator or a broken connector, whatever it is. There is one best way to resolve the problem, and it doesn't require any input from the vehicle. Like the vehicle doesn't have to talk about its feelings in order to be fixed. We see a lot of things like this in life. A lot of problem solving is based on the idea of diagnosing and repairing. When it comes to fixing human beings in terms of mental health factors, it doesn't work that way. The solutions are all inside the person. The client comes with everything they need to fix their situation, at least most of the time. The counselor's job is to explore, again, thought patterns and feelings and try to have the client realize what their solution is. The client finds the solution themselves. The counselor is just there to assist. The counselor is not a source of wisdom. The counselor is not someone who has all the answers and simply needs to select the correct answer for this situation. A counselor's job is to unlock the potential of the client. When counseling students or counseling supervisees hear this idea of you can't fix the client, they always say, "Oh, I get it. That makes perfect sense. I would never do that." But then when a client is seated in front of them, the first thing they do, much of the time, is try to fix the client. It is very difficult to move away from that mindset. People see pain and they think the solution to the pain is to offer advice, is to directly repair the pain. But it's not that simple. People are much more complex than that. They have to find their own solution. It's not a matter of laziness or incompetence on the part of the counselor. There is no way a counselor can fix a client's problem. It is impossible. So that's really the way I teach the don't fix it model. I don't frame it as a moral judgment, like it's bad for a counselor to have that desire. I frame it as an impossibility. A counselor cannot fix a client's problem, at least not adequately. The person who can do the best job is the client. It's important that the counselor give the client space to achieve the goal, to let them fix their own problem. So again, as counselors are learning their craft, as they're learning how to help clients, it's important to remember that the client has the answers. It's very difficult to accept that that's true, but that doesn't make it any less true. It's one of those concepts that really does take a few years to learn. When a person starts studying counseling, they will say they understand not to fix the client. When they mature as a counselor, they will truly realize why it doesn't make sense to attempt to fix the client. They will understand at a deeper level how the relationship between the counselor and the client actually functions.